So one thing that we found was actually very interesting here and somewhat surprising for us is that the presence of competing media, the television that I have on this slide, plays a very crucial role in terms of whether such link equilibria form or do not form. So specifically, link equilibria are much more likely to form if there is a strong competition from an outside medium. Okay, so if we have newspapers competing with each other, but also competing, let's say, with social media or television or video games, some other medium. And why is that? Notice that if you have this link in equilibrium, which is some form of a coordination situation where everybody, let's say, agrees, let's have one person put all the effort into creating great content and the rest of us are linking to them, the whole content ecosystem becomes more attractive to consumers, which means that consumers from other media will flow into the content ecosystem, okay? So basically, consumers will be attracted away from TV, and more of them will read the news. So they will split themselves between West Coast and East Coast times. Of course, a lot of the West Coast times readers will click the link, and they will go to East Coast times. And this, of course, gives even higher incentives to East Coast times to produce even better content, okay? Which will make it even more difficult for West Coast times to compete with it head-on. At the same time, West Coast times will retain some of this new traffic that will not click, those who are content to just read the headlines or read the little snippet of text. And which means that, if you have the ability to attract consumers away from alternative media, it becomes much more attractive for both competitors to quote-unquote coordinate rather than compete head-on, okay? And this makes it easier for such equilibria to form. Okay, so far I've painted a very kind of positive picture of links, right? So if links are so good, so why is everybody complaining about them? Well, so far I've described what happens if we have two or several sites which are more or less equally capable of producing content. So they have, their peers. But in the world, we don't have just peers, right? We have a lot of yellow papers, right? A lot of low quality publications. And in a world where there were no links, such publications will not be viable. I mean, if there's no link in a site that has no content or very low quality content, will not have enough visitors and it will not be viable. However, the presence of links allows a site of any capability, even sites which are totally incapable of producing contents, to just exist on the market by just linking to somebody. They can attract some visitors who will use them as a gateway to the content. They can attract some advertising, and therefore they can be viable. And because, as I mentioned to you, a basic premise of our model is that not everybody just clicks on the links, right? Some people are just content reading the headlines or the little snippet of description about the link. Those new sites that would otherwise not be viable, they can still enter the ecosystem, they can still capture some revenue from everyone else, and in a way they're imposing a tax on everyone else. So this is the downside of links. So let me just pause and just give you the verdict so far. So links enable peer sites to avoid excessive competition. That was actually a very interesting insight of our work. This results into better content and higher profits, but the very interesting observation is that such equilibria do not always form, okay? There are situations where those equilibria could form and make everyone better off, but they don't. And that's actually a very interesting implication in our view of having links to be free for all. The fact that links are free and any site can create them without necessarily paying or compensating the other side, in fact, it reduces the parameter region where sites do form links. And I will return to this point at the end of my presentation if I have time. But then again, at the same time, links do allow low quality sites that would otherwise not be viable to enter the ecosystem, okay? Now, of course, those new entrants, they extract a tax because they take away some of the attention from everyone else. But the other thing which is not very clear on my slides is that even low quality entrants have a positive impact because think about it, there are more gateways to content, okay? So there are more gateways to content, and therefore they make the entire ecosystem more attractive vis-a-vis the alternative media. So think about I was trying to find an equivalent in advertising. So if you keep adding bulletin boards, billboards in a city about a product, right? I mean, you just give them more, you give consumers more opportunities to become acquainted with your product, okay? So even if they do not add any more information relative to what other billboards you have, they still might make it more likely that people will become aware of what you have to offer vis-a-vis alternative offerings. So where do aggregators fit into all of this? So interestingly, so aggregators, the way we model it, are sites which basically have no content of their own, and they have a choice of links to the best available content. So in some ways, aggregators are similar to what we call low-quality sites in terms of their content at least, but also they have some interesting differences. So for example, if we have two sites, our model assumes that an aggregator, let's say Google or someone similar, would place one link to the site that has the best content, okay? Because, I mean, most aggregators, they don't link to everybody else. They place a selection of links. So aggregators, they share some of the pluses and minuses of low-quality content sites. So the plus is that by providing a gateway to good content, they make the entire ecosystem more attractive to consumers. The minus is that they inevitably appropriate some revenue that would otherwise go to the high-quality content sites. So one interesting implication of that is that aggregators can only be valuable to the content ecosystem if there is an alternative medium. If it's a closed universe where the traffic is just being traded between one site and the other, aggregators can never be beneficial because they are a new entity that wasn't there before. But in reality, there's always an outside alternative. I mean, any kind of news medium is competing for attention with something else, even if that something else is a discussion that people have offline. So the trade-off, the fundamental trade-off is that whether the gains that aggregators bring by attracting traffic to the entire ecosystem from other media, by helping organize the content and reducing search costs and blah, 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 they outweigh the losses to the content creators through the quote-unquote tax that the aggregator extracts by keeping some of the attention of consumers. But the other thing, the second-order effect of aggregators that is not as visible is the fact that because aggregators only place links to a subset of content, in some ways they intensify the competition of content producers to receive those links. Okay, once aggregators are in the game, okay, everybody wants to receive the link from the aggregator. So this means this has a number of implications. So first of all, it further compresses the site profits. Sites are already competing with each other. Now that we have aggregators, they compete even more because they want to be the best source. They want to be the source that the aggregator places at the top. And that's a minus for the sites, but a plus for the consumers. At the same time, however, because they face higher pressure to compete, it also makes it more likely that they will try to get out of this competition by forming link equilibria like the ones I presented to you a few slides ago. But then there's even a third implication. To the extent that aggregators use links as their guide as to who has the best content, this might actually make the sites reluctant to place links, because if you link to somebody, you essentially signal to the world and also to the aggregator that this somebody has the better content. And you don't want to do that because then the aggregator will link also to the target and you're going to lose out. So that was our verdict on aggregators, and all of that we explain it very clearly with a lot of math in our paper. We have a couple of extensions. So what happens if you have multiple topics as opposed to a single topic? Then we can think of equilibria where sites coordinate. One side becomes the expert on one topic, the other side becomes the expert on the other topic, and then they cross-link. And this is, again, a win-win situation, which is good when it happens, but one of the key messages of our talk is that those equilibria very often do not happen, even if they would make everyone better off if they would. And the other thing that everyone discusses is they say, well, stop talking about links. You can refuse links. There are technologies that allow you to refuse links you don't want. So what's the big fuss? So we try to study that. We say, what if the target of a link can refuse a link? Okay, how does it change things? So in theory, this would allow high-quality sites to keep low-quality free riders out. But what's very interesting is that this is not true if there is competition for links. Okay, if We have, let's say, aggregators who can only play links to a subset of sites, and everybody competes for them. Even though it would be great if everybody could band together and keep them out of the market by refusing links from them, they don't. Because they're competing, it's much more difficult to coordinate, and at the end of the day, the ability of refusing links becomes a moot point. In a lot of settings, competitive dynamics just basically force you to not exercise this ability, even if you have the power to do so. So let me get to the implications, and then I guess I'll have to finish. So here's what we see as the most interesting implications of our very initial attempt to model the situation. So linking across content sites is a promising tool that can reduce redundant effort and improve social outcomes. By that I mean, both profits for the news producers and the quality of content that's available to consumers in an industry which is hyper competitive. Okay, and it's not because of Google or other aggregators. It's hyper competitive because of the demolition of geographical barriers. So the other thing that's interesting is that the current free-for-all linking practices are suboptimal. So there are a lot of parameter regions where, as I mentioned, link equilibria that would make sites, content sites better off, they don't form. Okay. Free riding is not prevented, so there's nothing that prevents low quality sites from entering and capturing a slice of the people's attention by placing links. And also the option to refuse links, which is sometimes used as a defense by aggregators, it doesn't really help, because if you competitive dynamics just make it a moot point. So the billion-dollar question in our mind is, how can we develop new linking policies and new institutions that can lead to improved outcomes? So we have a number of ideas in the works that relate to link exchanges and marketplaces. I mean, associating payments with links and how this can change and maybe help sites coordinate a little better. But the other set of ideas, which actually is very intriguing, is so far we think of aggregators as being devices that primarily help consumers find content and better content. But there's a lot of potential of thinking of new types of aggregators, or maybe we should call them with a different name, whose main goal is to coordinate content producers as to what type of content is it good for you to produce versus link to, given what the competition is doing. I think there's a lot of potential to find the right mechanisms. I mean, this is something that doesn't, I know of a few startup ventures in this area, and we have a bunch of ideas about things that can happen in this space. Do I have any more time? 1 minute. Okay. So what I discussed with you so far are the theory part of the work. Now we have at least a couple of data projects which are at an early stage. So the one, as I mentioned to you at the beginning, one of the motivations of this work is the realization that in today's world, attention of a site, of a node on the web, depends not only on the quality of content, but on their network position. And so there is obviously a need and an interest to prove this with data. So we have a study where we try to show, using clickstream data, that attention that the site gets, to what extent it depends on its network position above and beyond the quality of the content. And then the other interesting path is to look at how today's media are using links and content and how this relates to their performance. And I guess in order to find interesting patterns here, I think the professional media are kind of hopeless because they're very far behind in their ability or acceptance of links. So we think social media and blogs are much more advanced in how they're experimenting with using linking to each other, or deciding what to write versus what to link, etc. So we have a study where we look at blogs and how they link and how their linking patterns relate to performance, and hopefully we'll try to find in those studies both confirmation of what we already are postulating, as well as new ideas that will move our theoretical thinking forward. And I guess that's it. So we have a working paper. You can find it, I guess, on my homepage. It's also on SSRN, but it will be a longer URL. I can take questions.